Very good morning, student. This is the lecture of object oriented programming using C++, and we have started second chapter, classes and objects. Before going to start the today's session, we will revise the yesterday's or previous session. That is, we have seen in the last session concept of constructor, how to call constructor, characteristics of the constructor, and how to define constructor inside and outside the class. Now, in this today's session, we will see the types of constructor. So, outcome of this session is, after this session, you will be able to explain the types of constructor. So without wasting time, we will start the session. See here, this is the diagram of types of constructor. First one is a default constructor, second is a parameterized constructor, copy constructor, and last is a dynamic constructor. First, what is constructor? Constructor is a special function which has the same name as the class name, and it automatically called when the object of the class is created. So first we will see the default constructor. The constructor which does not accept any argument is called a default constructor. In default constructor, the argument list is void. Means, suppose when we write any function, we can pass the argument, and in constructor also we can pass the argument. But the constructor which does not accept any argument means a blank list of the argument. If any constructor has the void list of argument, then it is known as the default constructor. Default constructor is also called as empty constructor because of it has no argument. So see here is a constructor, class name is a constructor, and it doesn't have any argument. So it is known as the default constructor. Also empty constructor. A default constructor is used to initialize all the objects of a class with the same value. Okay, this constructor is used for what? To initialize all the objects of the class with the same value. There can be only one default constructor in a class. The default constructor is defined as a constructor which does not contain any parameter or argument. So there is only one default constructor in a class. We cannot create multiple default constructor because this constructor doesn't have any arguments, and if we write multiple default constructor, compiler will give us a error. So default constructor is defined as the constructor which does not contain any parameter or arguments. A default constructor can be called directly when an object of the class is created. When after creating the class, in the main function we will create the object of that class, and when we create object of that class, this default constructor is automatically called. If no constructor are created, compiler will create a default constructor by itself. If we not create any constructor, then compiler create default constructor by itself. So see here the syntax. Here class name is the name of the class, open bracket public class name. This is the constructor which has the same name as the class name, that is a class name. Now here is a body of constructor. Here completion of the class, end of the class declaration. Here see here the example. This is actually syntax. Now this is the example. Student, scope resolution operator, student. So student is here, constructor, and here we are assigning or initialize the data member of the class student, that is roll number equal to 0, marks is equal to 0.0. Means after creating the object of this student class, the default constructor student is automatically called, and the roll number and marks, these data variables are initialized by value 0. Next one is a parameterized constructor. The previous one is the default constructor, which doesn't contain any parameters or argument. But in parameterized constructor, see, sometimes it is easy to initialize the various data elements of different objects with different value when they are created. So when we create any data members, after that we can easily initialize the various data element with the different objects and the value. This is achieved by passing argument to the constructor function when the objects are created. The constructor which accept any number of formal parameters and that formal parameters are used to initialize the object are called as a parameterized constructor. So the constructor which accept any number of formal parameters. So here is a formal parameters. Okay. And that formal parameters are used to initialize the object are called as the parameterized constructor. Means passing parameters are the formal parameters, and in the main function there will be a actual parameters. A parameterized constructor is defined as a constructor which accepts one or more arguments or parameters at the time of declaration of objects and initialize the data members of the objects with these parameters arguments. So what is parameterized constructor? Means the constructor which accept the arguments, okay, at the time of declaration of the object, and it initialize the members of the object with the parameters. So now see here the syntax. Class name is a name of the class, public class name. Now this class name is a constructor name, parameter 1, parameter 2, parameter 3. If we are passing this parameter from the constructor, then it is known as the parameterized constructor. Now here is the body of the constructor and here is the end of declaration of a class. Now see here the example: student, scope resolution operator, student, integer r. Now this integer r is a parameter and this parameter is passed through the student constructor, so it is known as a parameterized constructor. Now this r is a formal parameter and which is assigned to the actual parameter, that is the roll number. So roll number equal to r. So overloaded or multiple constructor. C++ allows defining multiple constructor with different number, data type or order of parameters in a single class using constructor overloading. So what is overloaded constructor means? What? In C++ we can define multiple constructor, but in the constructor we have to pass the different number of parameters. Means suppose take the example, class is a student, so constructor is also student. But when we are passing the arguments in that, in the first constructor we have passed suppose integer roll number, and in the second integer roll number and character name. Now these two are the multiple constructor. Two are the different multiple constructor. Why? Because it has the different number of parameters. Also data type. Means suppose in the first constructor we can use the integer data type. In the next we can use the data type character. And last one is the order of the parameters. Means suppose if in the first constructor we have passed the integer roll number, float percentage, and third is the character name. And if we want to create another constructor, we can just change the order of that parameters. So C++ allows defining multiple constructor with different number, data type or order of parameters in a single class using constructor overloading. Why overloading? Because name of the constructor is same, but the number of arguments, data type of argument and order of the parameters are different. The number of constructor can be defined for the same class with varying argument list is referred as overloaded constructor or multiple constructor. Means name of the constructor is same as the class name, just the argument list is different. C++ constructor overloading enables multiple constructor to initialize different object of a class differently. These objects can be initialized with the same values of different values or with the existing objects of the same class. Depending upon the number and type of argument, corresponding constructor will be invoked. So if we create the multiple constructor or overloaded constructor with the same name, so how we can invoke that, or how we can call that constructor, or how to guess that constructor? By using the number of arguments or sequence of argument or order of arguments, we can call the constructor, and depending upon that order of parameters and data type and different number, the constructor is called. So respective constructor is called. Now we will see the syntax for parameterized constructor. So class, here class name is the name of the class, public class name is a constructor, body of the default constructor, this is a default constructor, so there is no any argument or parameter. Now this is the class name, okay, this is the parameterized constructor and it has the parameter 1, parameter 2 and parameter n. So this is the body of parameterized constructor. Now this is one constructor and this is another constructor, so this is the overloaded or multiple constructor. This constructor doesn't have any argument list, but in this constructor we can pass the argument. So these are the two different constructors. So it is called as the overloaded or multiple constructor because number of the arguments are different. Here is no any arguments, here are the number of arguments. This is the overloaded or multiple constructor. Now we will see the constructor with the default argument. Number of the times a function uses the same argument for some situations. For example, while calculating the total price of the items, same discount rate may be applied to all the particular products. Therefore, instead of supplying such arguments all the time, C++ allows us to define an argument whose value will be automatically used by the compiler if it is not provided during the function call. This argument is called as a default argument. So see here, if we have taken the example of suppose calculating the total price, in that price the discount rate is same for the all products. In suppose we have purchased 4 to 5 type of products, each and every time the price of that item is different, but the discount rate is same, like 5%, 10%. So in that case we can use that type of member and we can assign some particular value, that is the same value to that member, and this is called as the default argument. So each and every time if you we can avoid providing same value to the member each and every time by using the default argument. Default argument can be used in a functions, methods or constructor. A feature similar to the method overloading in C++ is default argument. In C++, it is possible to define constructor with the default argument. See here, for example, complex text float real, float image equal to 0. In this statement, default value of the argument image is 0. So by default value is a 0. So when we use that float image, it will automatically take the value 0. Then the statement complex text ct 4.0 assigns the value 4.0 to the real variable and 0.0 to the image by default. Why? Because we have already initialized it by 0. The default argument is checked for its data type at the time of its declaration and gets evaluated at the time of call. So at the time of declaration, the default argument is checked and it calculates the value at the time of call. These arguments are evaluated from right to left. Whenever a call is made to the function without specifying an argument, the program will automatically assign values to the parameter from the default function prototype declaration. Means when we call any function without any argument, without passing any argument, then it will automatically take the value from the function prototype. Default arguments are useful when user wants same values for the arguments. Default arguments facilitate easy development and maintenance of a program. Means suppose if we want to keep the same value for the argument, we can use the default argument. Now third type is a copy constructor. A copy constructor takes a reference to an object of the same class as itself as an argument. A constructor that initializes an object using values of another object passed to it as parameter is called as a copy constructor. See here, a constructor that initializes an object using value of the another object. Means after creating the object, we can initialize the value of the object, and by taking that object, it will assign the another object or initialize the another object. Then it is known as the copy constructor. In C++, a new object of a class can be initialized with an existing object of the same class. For this, the compiler of C++ called the copy constructor. So when we create any new object of a class, it is initialized. It can be initialized by the existing object. Okay. Copy constructor creates the copy of the passed object. A copy constructor is defined as a constructor which accepts an already existing object through reference to copy the data member values. Now see here the syntax: class name is the name of the class, next class name is the constructor, and here we are passing the class name and object name. Here we are passing the object of the here we are passing the object of the same class. Now body of the constructor, here is the end of the class declaration. As with all constructors, the function name must be the class name. Okay, so name of the function and class name is the same. So it is a constructor. The parameter in the declaration is a reference to the class, which is characteristics of all copy constructors. While defining the copy constructor, it is recommended to specify the keyword constant for the reference parameter. This is because the existing object is used only to initialize the new object and cannot be changed by the copy constructor. Means at the time of creating copy constructor, we need to use constant keyword for the object. Why? Because this is a copy constructor and there is a possibility to make any changes in the original object. So to avoid this, we can use the constant keyword. So see here the syntax: class name, constant, class name, object name, body of the constructor, and it is the end of the class declaration. So here we are using the constant keyword. Why? Because at the time of executing the constructor, it cannot be changed by the copy constructor. So we use the constant keyword. To invoke a copy constructor, use following syntax. How to invoke or how to call the copy constructor? So class name, new object equal to existing object, or class name, new object in bracket existing object. By using this both method, we can invoke the copy constructor. The existing object is the object whose copy is to be created and stored in the new object. The argument is passed through reference and not through the value. So see here the important thing: when we pass the argument, it is through the reference and not through the value. So here ampersand operator is used because it's showing it is a reference. It is passed to the reference. And when we pass one object, that copy of that object is allocated or it is stored into the new object. Now see here the program of copy constructor. Class sample. X and Y are the private data member of the class sample. Sample, this is the default constructor because there is no any parameters here. Sample in bracket sample object. So this is a copy constructor. It is an ampersand means what? It is the address of the object, and void displays the member function of the class sample. Now sample scope resolution sample. This is a default constructor. In default constructor we are assigning values to the data members, that is that x equal to 10, y is equal to 20. Now this is initialized by using the default constructor. Now we will define the copy constructor. So sample is a class name, scope resolution operator, sample, and in bracket sample address of s. Now s is a new object and the value of this previous object is stored into this new object. So x equal to s dot x, y equal to s dot y. So now this is the existing object data, that is s dot x. This is the existing object and this is stored into this new object s dot y. Now in the next statement the member function is defined, that the display function is defined here. Cout x and y, it will display the value of x and y. This is the defining function outside the class. Now integer main sample object 1, this is the first object is object 1, and after creating this object 1, this default constructor gets automatically invoked. Now after creating this object 1, x get the value 10 and y gets the value 20. Now sample object 2 in bracket object 1. Now this is the copy constructor or calling the copy constructor. In this object 1, the value of the object 1 is assigned to object 2. Now what is the value of object 1? This is the x equal to 10 and y is equal to 20. Now this is copied into the object 2 also. Third one is it is also invoking the copy constructor by using another method, that is a sample object 3 equal to object 1. Now also the value of the object 1, that is the value of the parameters of object 1 x and y is copied into the object 3. Now we can call the display function by using all these three objects, object 1, object 2 and object 3. And what is the output of this program is? It is same, x equal to 20, x equal to 10, y is equal to 20. Again it will print x equal to 10, y is equal to 20, and for the third object it is also printed x equal to 10 and y is equal to 20. This is the program for the copy constructor. So this is about the types of constructor. In the next session we will see the default constructor, what is destructor, and the difference between constructor and destructor. So assignment question for this session is, what is default constructor? So in this question you have to write the definition of definition of default constructor, how to or what is the syntax of default constructor. First question is, explain default constructor with syntax, and second question is, explain copy constructor with syntax. So we will see dynamic constructor, destructor, and difference between constructor and destructor in the next session.